Hey friends, welcome to our monthly commitment teaching for August 2023. This month I'd like to talk with you about our commitment to be in service of the church. And more specifically, I want to share with you a little bit more about what it's been like for me over the past few months to transition from pastoring a local church to being without a church, which isn't really real. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And what it has been like to find myself sorting out the question that I know lots of people have been trying to sort out over the last couple of years. Like, where do I go to church? What does my family need right now? How do I show up in my local church with a posture to serve? These are the questions that I've been asking, and some of us are asking even one more question. How do I show up to my local church to serve authentically out of what is actually going on in my life right now? Like even related to the formation work we're doing with OCL. I want to say that oftentimes what I have seen over the years as I've pastored in a couple different contexts now and have been working as a spiritual director of primarily pastors and leaders is one of the biggest challenges in doing all of this formation work is the reality that it does something in us so deep, and we come to recognize the slowness of the work of God. That sometimes it can feel as though what happens on Sunday morning doesn't really move the needle for us in a way that it used to. Or we can come to think that perhaps it doesn't move the needle much for anyone. And I think I understand some of what is happening here. And I can understand the tension that some might feel in this formation kind of work that we're doing and the church from a stage work that happens on Sunday. I do think that there's a bit of a tension here. And I want to offer one metaphor that has been helpful for me as I think about this question and I pastor people through this question in one short passage of scripture for us to consider. So the metaphor is the metaphor of a hearth. And the hearth is the part of a fireplace that is usually built of stone or brick, and it's designed to hold in the fire. And it absorbs heat from the fire and ideally is meant to throw that heat back out into the room. So if you've ever sat in front of an indoor fire, it's most certainly had a hearth to hold the fire. And the church, as a hearth, is meant to help create the conditions whereby we're able to become a fire that burns really hot. This is the metaphor I'd like for you to consider. So one of the sayings of the Desert Fathers talks about becoming all flame. It says this: Abba Lot went to Abba Joseph and said to him, Abba, as far as I can say in my little office, I fast a little, I pray and meditate, I live in peace, and as far as I can, I purify my thoughts. What else can I do? Then the old man stood up and stretched his hands towards the heaven. His fingers became like 10 lamps of fire, and he said to him, if you will, you can become all flame. Now, Abba Joseph never actually tells us how you become all flame, but it is within the church and the refinement that we receive as being a part of the church that we learn how to love one another more deeply. And I know that we can't become all flame in whatever sense Abba Joseph might have meant it if we're not also learning how to love in increasing measure. And so the church provides a hearth for us where we can learn to burn really hot. And without that kind of refining work of the church, without placing ourselves in the hearth of the church, I do not believe that we will be able to continue the work of our formation. Now, in the tradition that we're drawing from, this monastic tradition in both cloistered and dispersed forms, both of these forms are filled with examples of what it looks like to place oneself within the constraints and the hearth of the church in a monastery or in a religious order, doing missional work in a dispersed way. I mean, the entire Benedictine tradition, including the Cistercians, straight from the rule of Benedict, warned against what Benedict called the gyrovags. So these were so-called monks who refused to settle into a community. And they spent years visiting different monasteries, traveling from house to house, because they didn't want to settle down. What Benedict was writing against is the refusal of some to allow themselves to be formed and constrained by the people and the rhythms and the conflicts and the imperfections of particular communities, particular places. So I think I just want to say that wherever you are in the process of formation with us, we would say that leaning into a local church community is really important to the work that we're doing, because one of the commitments that we have is to be in service to the church. And it's really hard to serve the church if you're not embedded in the church. So there are 4 primary things, among other lots of things, that I believe are building blocks of the hearth of the church. In Acts chapter 2, we read that the earliest communities, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to breaking of bread and to prayer. So the apostles' teachings, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. So the apostles' teachings, that's a sermon. Like, I believe in the power of opening up the scriptures and preaching the gospel from the scriptures in community. And not just from anyone, but from someone who has been given the authority by the people in the room to lead and to teach and to guide in a way that handles the scriptures accurately. And fellowship with others as part of gathered people of God is really important. This is where we learn how to love with these people in this particular place. The breaking of bread is sharing in the presence of God in the Eucharist with other people. This is the part of being together where we, God's people, are hosted by God with a meal. And so there's so much formational work that is happening in this week after week, tiny little meal that we share together. And then finally to prayer, which is really the only one of these 4 things that you could possibly even do alone. So as much as we might be able to recognize that we're bumping up against the limits of Sunday mornings for the kind of formational work that we want to see happen in the life of our churches, friends, it's really important to be engaged in a local church. It's by being there where we will discover the ways that God will invite us to step in further to serve and to love and to pour out all that God is pouring into us. And that might be simply to pray for someone, or it might be to mentor someone, or perhaps it's to be trained as a spiritual director and to serve in that way and to guide someone deeper into the waters of prayer or grief or navigating some sort of deconstruction. So as we brought our local church to a close, the Abbey, our last service was Easter Sunday, and then we did a celebration service just this past June. I felt all the disorientation that you could imagine. And I took a week off, and then I showed up to church the next week. A different church, of course. And it's taken a couple of months to sort out a bit, and it'll probably take a few more months to fully land in a way that feels good. And to be completely honest, the first 6 or so weeks at another church, I was processing a ton of grief with closing the Abbey, but I wasn't doing it alone. Like, I was surrounded by people who were there to worship, to receive a word from the scriptures, to pray, to share in the Eucharist together. There were people there to pray for me and to welcome me. And so I just want to say that I cannot imagine my life apart from the church as a hearth, as a place where the fire is burning even when maybe we're not feeling like all flame. And so this month, I want to invite you to consider how the church has been a hearth for you. And I'd love for you to spend some time thinking and praying and really considering, how do I presently feel invited to serve the church as a brick or a stone in the hearth? How is God inviting me to show up with the flame of His love at work in me in a way that contributes to the flame of God's love contained within the whole church? How does the love of God in me help others within the church towards becoming all flamed, inflamed with the love of God, and even more specifically, able to love with the love that God has poured out into us? So friends, we'll have a few questions for you to consider below. We look forward to hearing how these conversations go in your formation group. So much love and grace to you.